Hello and welcome to the Robert Report. With me today is Ni Kumping. Ni, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Chinese and 16 years old, and I'm here to tell you about how my family was murdered and by who. I'm sorry.
It's okay, just start talking when you're ready.
This happened 13 years ago, and I was only 3 at the time.
Tell me, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly happened to your family?
My mother and sister were raped and killed in front of my father and me. My father was shot after he witnessed my mother and my sister killed, and I was shot in the shoulder.
How did you manage to live through that gunshot even though you were only an infant?
A nice couple found me after they were running away from the soldiers.
What happened to the soldiers that killed your family?
Everyone that is in Japan or Japanese lives in denial now that They live in denial because they do not want to remember what they did to us.
Do you know how many were killed?
My parents told me over 390,000 people died during the massacre.
I thought you said your birth parents were killed.
All of my family members were killed, including my birth parents, so the couple that found me became my parents and took care of me, and they still do.
I know this is a pretty obvious question, but why was this so unsettling?
Over 80,000 women were raped and citizens were killed at random, so you didn't know who was going to be killed. Soon the streets and alleys were covered with dead bodies, and it continued for months.
Was any Japanese royalty prosecuted?
No, in fact, at the war crimes trial in 1948, not a single member of the royal family was prosecuted. The reason for Japanese not being prosecuted was because they gave up data on an often fatal medical experiment that was tested on prisoners.
Thank you for our cooperation today.
Thank you.
In a few short moments, we'll be back with the firebombing of Tokyo and Dresden with Dr. Yamaguchi and Mr. Frankfurt. Back now. Here with you is Mr. Dr. Yamaguchi from the Japanese Institute of Psychology.
Hello.
So I get you here today to discuss with us how the firebombing was for Japan, correct?
Yes, indeed. The war was going fine for social life in Japan until the firebombing.
How many casualties did the firebombing cause?
There were 80 to 100,000 victims.
That sounds bad.
This was even worse than the 2 atomic bombs.
What else on the firebombing on Tokyo?
Tokyo, on March 9 through 10, 1945, was when the fires burned most of Tokyo in one night. With the introduction of the new B-29 superfortresses, the bombers destroyed 16 square miles in one night. They dropped tons upon tons of M69 incendiary bombs. And
there are still billions of you.
Yes, indeed.
Well, we'll be back with Mr. Frankfurt, who's a prominent historian from Germany. And we're back with Mr. Frankfurter. You're not Mr. Frankfurter.
Are you Mr. Frankfurter?
No, you're not.
I am half Asian and half European, so I still count. Do you have any questions for me?
Is it an alias?
Sure.
Well, so as I know, there's a firebombing in Dresden, Germany too, right?
There was indeed a firebombing in Dresden.
So can you elaborate on the subject?
Well, on February 3rd, 1945, the RAF, or Royal Air Force, from Great Britain, with 773 Avro Lancaster bombers, and the USAAF, which is the United States Army Air Force, with 527 heavy bombers.
Now, as you heard before this, the Tokyo firebombing was pretty big. So, how can we compare the two firebombings?
Well, the firebombing in Tokyo was devastating because Japan was not yet industrialized, and most of their structures were made of wood, while Dresden was an old medieval city made out of stone.
So, it didn't cause as many casualties in Dresden as in Tokyo?
Actually, in Dresden, campaign had many more casualties. 135,000 casualties.
But the city is made of stone, and as I recall, stone doesn't burn.
Well, the stone structures had wood to support it, and the floors and roofs were made of wood. So the city was pretty much burned and crumbled.
Well, that sounds pretty heavy.
Well, the Dresden firebombing was said to be the biggest air raid and destructive in the whole war.
Well, thanks for coming, Mr. Frank Yamaguchi. We'll see you later and be back with the invasion of Normandy. Hello, and welcome back to the Robert Report. A couple of days ago, one of the most gruesome battles went down on the beaches of Normandy. Many of the soldiers that were sent to take over Normandy died, but we have the pleasure of interviewing one of them that didn't. Here with us today is Jonathan Hunt, talking about what went down on D-Day.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Hunt, and I am one of the soldiers who bravely fought at Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. It's a miracle I'm here with you today.
What was it like in the days leading up to D-Day?
Well, all we could really do was prepare for battle with the Nazis.
How many soldiers were fighting for America?
In the first 24 hours, there were 150,000 soldiers.
That's a whopper. I heard you had to consider the illumination of the moon.
Yes, we wanted it to be perfect. Not too bright, but not too dark, so we can see everyone, and they couldn't see us.
How many ships were there in the ocean?
There were so many ships in the ocean. From the sky, there looked like there were enough ships to walk across the ocean. And I don't mean walk on water. I mean you could walk from one ship to another.
I guess we really wanted to win.
Well, yeah.
What was the ride over like?
The waves were so tremendous that the water was getting inside and starting to sink the ships. So the soldiers had to bail out the water with their helmets. And the tides made us 2 hours and 10 minutes later than the planned arrival. It was very loud because they were firing cannons to soften up the ground before we got there.
When you arrived, what happened?
We opened the doors to the ships and the Nazis' army started firing on us with 155 caliber machine guns. And within 10 minutes, every officer or sergeant was either injured or dead. The waves were...
Ding, ding, ding! Kill streak!
Not funny.
So how many Americans died that day?
About 4,700 people died that day.
And all of them are American heroes. In a second, we'll be back with the Battle of the Bulge. At the end of the Robert Report, we normally start out criticizing our favorite politicians. But today, I thought we would switch it up a bit and comment on the man with the horrid facial hair. No, not him. Ah, yes, him. Hitler not only has his mustache that is bad, but also his skills in general are horrible. Last December, Hitler decided to embark on a huge counteroffensive, even though his generals told him that Germany had not enough manpower nor fuel to supply the attack. But he continued anyways. Hitler believed that it would be a great plan to launch the Ardennes offensive, more commonly known as the Battle of the Bulge, because it created huge balls that made the American front lines a bulge. Hitler's goals of the offensive was to destabilize the alliance of Britain, the US, and Canada, along with take the port of Antwerp, which would cut off many supplies to the Canadians along with the rest of the Allies. Hitler believed that his forces would be able to surround and cut off Canada's 1st Army, America's 1st and 9th Armies, and Britain's 2nd Army. On paper, it was a horribly conceived plan, even more so because Germany had been in retreat since D-Day. Germany's military was depleted of the supplies and was facing the awesome might of the Allies. However, Hitler, as commander-in-chief of the military, insisted that the attack take place. At the beginning of the battle, Hitler had the upper hand because of the surprise, along with the German soldiers dressed as Americans, made trouble behind the lines, lighting fires and spreading confusion. Along with that, the fog made it impossible to use the of the German lasted only 2 days. Despite pushing a bulge in the Allied front line, the German cannot do much more than this. An attack required massive amounts of fuel to maintain, and the Germans did not have such quantities of fuel. By December 22nd, the weather started to clear. thus allowing the Allies to bring the Air Force into power. And on the following day, the Americans started a counterattack against the Germans. The New Year's period was a time of particularly intense fighting, as the Germans attempted to start a second front in Holland. This time, the Andreas was the period of intense cold and rain, and the soldiers on the ground faced very difficult conditions. Transport was a common problem for infantrymen, as well was exposure. By mid-January 1945, the lack of fuel was becoming so evident as the Germans abandoned their vehicles. The 1st Panzer Division had to make their way back to Germany on foot. The Battle of the Bulge is the largest battle fought by Americans in the war. 600,000 American troops were involved in the battle. The Americans lost 81,000 men, and the Germans lost 100,000, killed, wounded, and captured. The Germans also certainly could not have won that battle. They had one huge problem: their inability to keep their vehicles supplied with fuel. The Allied bombing of fuel plants in Germany meant no such supplies existed.